Have you ever looked at a vehicle and thought, I could probably fix that? That's exactly what I thought. And now we're here. There is a massive hole in my floor. An extensive rust repair that needs to happen. It'll be fine though. If you missed last episode, I cut a hole into my floor so that I could remove my old cab mount to replace it with a brand new one. Which is what we're going to start doing today. Picking up right where we left off, this rusty mess needs to be separated. There's a few spot welds holding this together. I actually just upgraded to these spot weld drill bits, which is going to make things a lot easier. Instead of drilling through both pieces of metal, this one cuts through the top layer just enough to where you could chisel the panels apart, which is going to save me a lot of time. I'll have most of the tools that I'm using in this video linked down below if you're interested in any of them. So with these pieces separated, we can now see the full extent of the damage. My main worry is the floor support. There's a lot of pre-made patch panels for these trucks. Sadly, floor supports are not one of them. So I definitely need to make a custom patch panel for this piece. And as for the floor itself, there is a lot of pitting. So I might buy a new patch panel, but I'll decide on that later. For now, let's clean some of this rust. Cleaning the rust off is going to give me a good idea of how bad the pitting actually is and where solid metal begins. The floor support is supposed to be 16 gauge, and it's not even close to that. The bottom and side are pretty thin, so those sections will definitely need to be replaced. So let's start on the template. I'm going to be making this as two separate pieces, and then I'll weld them together later on. This outline is going to be a rough draft of the side. I'm going to leave it a little bit larger than it needs to be, and then I'll trim it down as we move forward. One thing that I wasn't expecting was how much harder it is to cut 16 gauge compared to 18 gauge. I was struggling pretty bad, and this is just the beginning of the job. There's way more to do. So I did some research and I picked up one of these bad boys. This is a throatless shear, and it had really good reviews online. Someone even said that it cut through 16 gauge like butter, so I was sold. Eastwood, please sponsor me. But that review was right. It cut through 16 gauge easily, and it made cutting the curves out really simple. And that is our side section all cut out. The final trimming will be later on. Now let's start making the bottom piece. I thought the light would help there, but it made it worse. Sorry. Now this is not going to be as easy as the first piece. This one has some curves to it. I marked out these blue lines to show where I'm going to make my bends. I first tried to hammer the curve in on a dolly, but it wasn't enough. So I switched it to a vise and clamped it down. The vise did give me a better bend. The only problem was that it was a sharp bend and I needed this to be more of a curve. So I went back to the hammer and dolly and flattened it out slightly. And that is good enough for who it's for. After a little bit of trimming, both pieces are done. The last thing we have to do before welding is clean up the floor support to ensure that we get good welds. Like the floor, this has a lot of pitting. And there's most likely going to be some rust in those pits that I can't get to. But the less rust, the better. All I want is some decent metal to weld to. Now this will be my first welding project. I did some practice on leftover scrap, and I think I'm ready for this. I started out by laying a few tacks down to keep everything in place. I had a little bit of a fitment issue on one side, so I sanded the metal back some more till everything lined up. Lastly, I ran a cutoff wheel through any spots that were touching. Let me know what you think of the gap size here. I'm not sure if I made it too large, but I've heard people saying that a cutoff wheel is a good way to ensure that you have a proper welding gap. As you can see, that didn't go as planned. My settings were definitely off there, and it looks terrible. So I'm gonna grind that down and act like nothing happened. Hopefully those welds will hold. This piece isn't gonna be put under any crazy pressure, so I think it'll be fine. Learning takes time, and I will get better at this. I adjusted the settings and hit any spots that I missed. This pass was a lot better in my opinion. You could see penetration on some of those welds. So hopefully that'll be good enough. After I cleaned those up, it was time to fit this to the truck. Before doing a full fitment with the floor in, I want to make sure this piece lines up well. The end was a bit curved, so it needed some trimming. So with that in place, I laid the floor on top to see how everything would fit together. You can see that the floor support isn't actually touching the floor in some spots, but that could be fixed easily with some force later on. Overall, I'm pretty happy with that. Now we need to wait before installing that bottom piece to the new cap supports in, so this will probably be one of the last things that I weld together. Let's move on to the giant hole in my floor. As you can see, that cap support was hiding a lot of rot behind it. There was a piece of metal blocking this foam in, but it pretty much rusted away. So I've got some plans to stop that from happening again. Originally, I think this piece was made out of 20 gauge. So I'm going to make this patch out of 18 gauge, which is a little bit thicker and should help out in terms of durability. And more importantly, I'm going to pick all of that foam out. I know I've said this before, but if you have an opportunity to remove this foam or the foam in your cab corners, do it. Otherwise, the same exact rust holes will just form again. There's also 2 plugs that I removed in there, so any water that finds its way in can find its way out. Now it's important to make a quick template before I remove any metal. There's not much to go off of on either side, but I'm assuming the original piece looks something like this. It's a little bit larger than the old one, but I can always just trim the extra metal. Now with this template made, I can sand down the remaining spot welds and start prepping to patch the floor. While doing all of this, I found a slight problem. More rust. This time, it was on the backside of this support. Luckily, it doesn't look that bad. This support is a lot thicker than 16 gauge, so I should be able to save this with some sanding and rust converter. But all that got me thinking, how is water getting into this area? I did find it interesting that 2 holes of the bottom door plate are rusted. So that means that water is getting in from somewhere above that plate and dripping down onto where the foam was. I'm thinking the seam sealer failed somewhere, possibly in the cowl, and now it's letting water through, but I'm not sure. I don't have a solid fix for this yet, but I do have this stuff. It's supposed to change rusted metal into a prime surface, ready for paint. so I'm going to give it a try. The directions say to lay this stuff on pretty thick, and after a few minutes, the rusty metal should become black. I got good coverage on the side, but the same cannot be said about the back. It was hard to get the foam brush back there, and I don't think I put enough on to cause a full reaction. So I'll have to come up with something else later on. But with that metal somewhat protected, it's time to fit the new floor. I decided to get a new patch panel rather than trying to get the original one to work. I will say that I'm not happy that this patch is 20 gauge rather than the original 18 gauge the floor is made out of. But I guess that's what you get now. I'm not going to be using this whole patch, but I do want to replace some more of my floor on the side. As you can see, the metal wasn't terrible everywhere, but since the patch is big enough, I may as well replace any rusted areas. I know that a lot of people like to leave the floor patch a little bit larger than the hole and then lap weld it in, but I'm going to attempt to butt weld the section in. So I've marked where it hits, and I'll trim those till this section fits in nicely. I've also got to clean that bottom section of rust converter. I got a little bit ahead of myself there. I won't be able to strike an arc from my plug welds without clean bare metal. Now before the floor goes in, I want to test that template that I made earlier. It definitely needs some trimming, but it looks like it lines up nicely. I'll drill some holes into that next episode and weld it in. For now, we need to focus on the floor. To protect this area from any rust in the future, I'm going to hit it with some weld through primer. First I'm going to clean the metal with some acetone, and then I'll lay on a few coats of this stuff. The last step here is to clean the edges of any paint. I also repeated this on the backside. Like before, I placed a few tacks down and then ran the cutoff wheel through any points that were touching. Now, I didn't get much footage of me actually welding the floor in, because I was riding the struggle bus here. I still think the cutoff wheel was making the gap too big, and I also ended up running out of shielding gas, which is nice. After a quick refill, I got 95% of the floor welded in. There's still some pinholes and small areas that need to be welded shut, but it's close. Don't get me wrong, this isn't the greatest, but with this being my first welding project, I'm happy with how far it's come along. I actually had the right settings when I welded the floor in, and you can see that there's penetration in almost the entire patch, so that's great. But yeah, that's where I'm going to end this one. In the next episode, I'll be welding in the rest of the patches, so stay tuned.